This week, in wrestling history, the final installment, 1 year later. Let's do this. 42 years ago this week, on September 1st, 1979. I covered this a year ago, but I'll mention it again here. WWE introduced the Intercontinental Championship, claiming Pat Patterson won it in a tournament in Rio de Janeiro, unifying his WWF North American title with the South American Championship, even though no record exists of there even being a South American Championship. On that same date, 31 years ago in 1990, came the Memphis wrestling angle with Jerry Lawler and Eddie Gilbert, where Gilbert ran down Lawler with a car and nearly killed him. USWA General Manager Eddie Marlin fired Gilbert and his brother Doug in storyline and escorted them out of the studio into the parking lot. Lawler came out to chase him off. Eddie and Doug got in their car and they started driving towards Lawler and Marlin. Marlin moved, but Lawler jumped up as the car approached. He hit the windshield, he bounced off the car, landed hard on the pavement, landed right on his hip, and rolled a few times as the car sped away. Gilbert thought he had killed him, like legitimately killed him. As they drove off, he thought he was going to be wanted for murder. And the fans watching live were freaked out. They thought Lawler was either dead or crippled. One fan in the studio, at least one, called an ambulance. Other fans called the cops, who came to the studio looking to arrest Gilbert. Lawler was forced to go back out later in the show in front of the crowd and let them know that he was fine, which he really wasn't, but at least to let them know, I'm alive, I'm okay. So that the cops wouldn't arrest Gilbert and wouldn't put, I guess, a warrant out for his arrest. 31 years ago this week, on September 5th, 1990, Clash of the Champions 12, Mountain Madness, aired on TBS from Asheville, North Carolina, featuring Kevin Nash's WCW debut, sporting a mohawk, as Steel of the Master Blasters. It was Master Blaster Steel and Master Blaster Iron, who sucked. He was replaced right after this by Master Blaster Blade. But this show is most remembered, not for the Master Blasters, but for the Black Scorpion. This was the Black Scorpion angle. This was when Jim Herd was running things in WCW, which should tell you all you need to know. And he was coming up with all sorts of cartoonish ideas for gimmicks, like he was trying to make WCW something more closely resembling what Vince McMahon was doing at the time with WWE. Well, Ole Anderson was the booker. And Ole Anderson was not about any of the cartoonish stuff, so you can imagine how happy he was around this time. I don't know that Ole was ever happy. I think he was born pissed off. But it got to the point where he would just start throwing out these really outlandish, ridiculous ideas in meetings with Herd, and Herd would always reject them, until one day, Ole came up with this idea for there to be a mystery man under a mask, somebody from Sting's past. Sting was the champion at the time. And now this person is back to either get revenge on Sting or torment Sting. And much to Ole's chagrin, Herd actually liked the idea, and he said, let's do it. Let's run with it. So now Ole came up with this idea as a joke, and now he's got to use it, having no idea who the Black Scorpion would even be. They hadn't thought that far ahead yet. Ole did the voice for the character, giving him the distinction. This serious guy, Ole Anderson, has the distinction of being the voice of two of the biggest flops in WCW history, the Black Scorpion and the Shockmaster. But a lot of fans who knew Sting's past as part of the Blade Runners started thinking that maybe it was the Ultimate Warrior, even though Warrior at the time was the WWF champion. And I don't think they minded playing off those rumors because in The Torch and in The Observer, it was well documented that Vince McMahon was not happy about Warrior's performance as champion around that time. So maybe, right, just maybe, it was the Ultimate Warrior. But no, it was never going to be the Warrior. On this night at the Clash, Sting retained his title over the Black Scorpion, who on this night was played by Al Perez, who would quit the company shortly after this. After the match, A second Black Scorpion appeared on the ramp, and this would continue to drag out all the way until Starrcade because Ole had no idea who the Black Scorpion was going to be. They even had an army of Black Scorpion jobbers, messengers, that would wrestle on TV and lose. Finally, in December, Sting wrestled the real Black Scorpion in a cage match, and he unmasked him afterwards, revealing that it was Ric Flair. This was all very, very dumb. 29 years ago this week, on September 1st, 1992, at a WWF Superstars taping in Hershey, Pennsylvania, Ric Flair won his second WWF Championship from Macho Man Randy Savage in a match that had to be taped twice and did not air for 2 weeks on Primetime Wrestling. 12 minutes into the match, the first time they tried to tape it, Vince McMahon was so unhappy with it, he sent Bobby the Brain Heenan down to the ring to signal to referee Earl Hebner that he wanted everybody to head back to the locker room. And Howard Finkel made the announcement to the live crowd, this match will continue as soon as the referee regains control. And they all went to the back. And after a few squash matches in between, Flair and Savage were sent back out to the ring to wrestle another 25 minutes, which is what aired on TV, with Savage selling his injured knee from Summerslam a lot more than I guess he was doing in the first match. That was, if you remember the SummerSlam match at Wembley Stadium, Flair and Perfect went after Savage's knee. So they were playing off the injury here. In fact, it played into the finish of this match. Razor Ramon came out during the match. Flair had locked Savage in the figure 4 leg lock after Razor had interfered, and Savage passed out from the pain, which allowed the referee to count 3 and award the title to Ric Flair. Flair only had the title for 5 weeks before losing it to Bret Hart in a match that did not air on TV at all. 2 very hastily done title changes that year, as they were obviously transitioning over to younger, newer, different faces on top. This was when the heat was really on Vince and the company with the steroid stuff. 28 years ago this week, on August 30th, 1993, SummerSlam was at the Palace in Auburn Hills. I always thought of this show when I thought about the Palace, until the Malice at the Palace in 2004 with the Pacers and the Pistons. That was crazy. 9 players were suspended as a result of the brawl that ensued that night. This show was a lot more tame. Ted DiBiase wrestled his final match for the WWF in a loss to Razor Ramon. His troubles at home and his marriage were mounting. He was doing things he should not have been doing. So he left to return to All Japan Pro Wrestling, where he spent time in the 80s tagging with Stan Hansen. And he would have a lot of time off at home between tours, which I guess he felt was preferable to the WWF schedule. And obviously he wouldn't have all that time off working for Vince McMahon. He went back to tagging with Stan Hansen in September, and they won the Tag Team Championship just 4 days into his first tour. And 2 months after that, he injured 2 discs in his neck, which led to him retiring from the ring for good. He would be back in the WWF by January as an announcer at the Royal Rumble. Shawn Michaels retained his Intercontinental title over Mr. Perfect by countout in a disappointing match. This match had a lot of high hopes. I think a lot of people had high hopes coming into this match, given who was involved. This could have been a classic. It could have been on the level of, Bret Hart and Curt Hennig, 2 years before at SummerSlam. But it was not to be. It was anything but. It was also the first SummerSlam where the Intercontinental title did not change hands. We could have had a Bret Hart versus Hulk Hogan match on this show as well. But Hogan was already gone from the company. He finished up with the WWF earlier in the month on a European tour. This, after dropping the championship to Yokozuna at the King of the Ring. Now, Bret claims that backstage at WrestleMania 9, Hogan thanked him and told him he would be happy to return the favor to him, as Bret did for Hogan by stepping aside. And, Hogan, of course, beat Yokozuna that night in 90 seconds or whatever it was and won the championship. So this is what Bret claims, that Hogan said he's willing to return the favor. In his book, he claims that he was summoned, Bret was, to a secret photo shoot with Hogan backstage at the Superstars taping in Halifax, Nova Scotia on May 24th to shoot promotional materials for Summerslam, where the two of them had a tug-of-war over the WWF belt in this photo shoot. 5 days later, he says Vince McMahon called to tell him that he was going to get the belt back and not to talk to Hogan because he hadn't called Hogan yet to tell him the news. Fast forward 10 days, Bret says Vince called him again and he warned him, "I've got bad news." Hogan was refusing to put him over, and instead he would drop the belt to Yokozuna. And Vince said he was going to have one more meeting with Hulk to try to change his mind, but if not, Bret would be working instead with Jerry Lawler at SummerSlam, which would explain why the angle was done at the end of the King of the Ring, after Bret won the crown. Now, of course, Hogan denied all of this and told Bret that Vince told him the match would be non-title, and that once Vince said the match would be non-title, he simply refused to do it because he didn't think doing the match was worth it. But as Bret pointed out to him, he said, "Terry, we did the photo shoot in Halifax, fighting over the belt. Why would he have us do that if it wasn't going to be for the championship?" So we never did get the match, not until both of them were in WCW years later. And Bret was to instead wrestle Lawler, but Lawler that night showed up on crutches. He was feigning a knee injury from a, he said, horrific auto accident earlier that day. Had to pull himself from the wreckage. So in his place, he sent his court jester, Doink the Clown, to face Bret Hart. And not for nothing, they had a very good match. I enjoyed the match between Bret and Doink. Evil Doink. Evil Doink was the best Doink. But Matt Bourne was a good wrestler, so the two of them went in there, they had a good match. Lawler smashed Bret at the end of it right across the back of the head with that crutch. I mean, he absolutely smashed Bret Hart with this crutch. It was a stiff shot. And Bret Hart gave Lawler his receipt at the end of their match, which immediately followed the Doink match, because I think it was Jack Tunney came out and said, "You've got to wrestle." You know, Lawler was trying to get out of it. So they did the second match immediately after the Doink match. At the end of it, Bret locked Lawler in the sharpshooter, and for about 4 straight minutes, he refused to let go of the hold. He said he was trying to hurt him on purpose. And Lawler, screaming in the hold, may have been more shoot than work. Lex Luger, the face turn on the Intrepid, is what built to this main event here on this show. Vince wanted a new Hogan, is basically what happened. He knew Hogan was gone. Hogan was leaving. He had just lost the championship. He needed a new top babyface. He already had Lex Luger on the roster. Luger was a heel. He was the narcissist. He was full of himself. He would look at himself in a mirror. He had the loaded forearm with the metal plate from the motorcycle accident. He was a heel. But Vince looked at him and said, "We can make this guy the new All-American babyface." You knew he was replacing Hogan because it was the same thing with the stars and the stripes. It was like a carbon copy of Hogan that he was trying to produce here. And so they did the whole thing on the Intrepid on July 4th, where Yokozuna was going to, people were going to try to slam Yokozuna. And they brought in football players and retired football players and other wrestlers and all people from all walks of life and sports to try to pick this guy up. And some of them, came a little close, but obviously nobody slammed Yokozuna. And if any of the NFL guys were legit trying to get him up, he would just deadweight them. You get a guy who's 520 pounds just deadweighting you. I mean, you got to be the Incredible Hulk to pick that person up. So then all of a sudden the chopper, right, off in the distance, it lands on the helipad. And here comes Lex Luger, and he's wearing this red, white, and blue stars and stripes, sweater. And it's like a switch got flipped, and overnight he just went from being this completely conceited, self-absorbed heel to being the all-American babyface who cares about the red, white, and blue and the good old US of A and all the fans. He slammed Yokozuna, if you can call it a slam. He slammed Yokozuna, and everybody went nuts. The Intrepid thing was actually really cool as far as doing something like that in that kind of setting. It was cool, and you have to at least give them credit for putting that together and trying. They tried their ass off to try to get this guy over. Then came the Lex Express. They commissioned a bus. They put Lex Luger on a bus for about 6 or 7 weeks, crisscrossing all over the country. Although Bruce Pritchard says he did fly to some places, Luger said they would fly him home to give him a day or two with his family. He had a baby daughter at the time who was only about a year or two old. But it all built to the Lex Express pulling in to the Palace for Summerslam at the big championship match, Luger challenging Yokozuna for the title. I think this was the year they brought in Aaron Neville to sing. Was it America the Beautiful? I think it was. They went all out trying to get this guy over. And you would watch all of this and figure there's no way he's leaving without that championship. Everything pointed to there being a title change on this show. Everything. They have the match. The match itself is really nothing special. Luger hits Yoko in the head with the loaded forearm and knocks him out of the ring. Yokozuna is out. He is out on the floor, unconscious. The referee starts counting. Luger's counting along with the ref. And he rings the bell, and people cheer at first. And Luger is celebrating. He's like practically jumping up and down. He's so happy he just won this match. And I remember even as a young fan then, not some cynical podcaster here, or an analyst, but watching it just as a young fan, thinking this is the stupidest thing that I've ever seen. What is he celebrating about? You didn't win the championship. But the idea is that Vince McMahon felt the biggest attraction that he had for WrestleMania 10 was Luger winning the title. This was not Luger having heat. This was not Luger being buried. This was not Luger being in the doghouse. Same thing with WrestleMania, by the way, the following year. That's been an urban legend for so many years, that Luger was drunk at a bar or something the night before WrestleMania spouting off about, I'm going to win the title. It's bullshit. It's just such a complete bullshit. The fact is that they waited too long. That's what happened. This was the time to do the title change. Vince thought he could put it off and build it up a little bit more for WrestleMania the following year. The problem is, you put this man on a bus for 6 weeks only for him to win by countout and then celebrate as if he had just won the championship. Given the stipulation, you got to remember something else about the stipulation for this match too, which made it doubly stupid. The stipulation was that it would be Luger's one and only title shot. I think Jim Cornette and Storyline had worked it into the contract. Luger would only get one crack at the championship, and if he didn't win it, that was it. He wouldn't get another shot. So, again, I can understand Vince McMahon thinking, well, then Luger will win the Royal Rumble, and that's his way around the stipulation. But if you're a fan watching this, and you're watching Luger let the referee count this guy out, and then you're celebrating, why in God's name would he be celebrating if he knew in Storyline, oh, I've only got one shot here to win this championship? It's like all they accomplished here was making Lex Luger look like a damn fool. And by the time the Royal Rumble rolled around, yeah, he still had fans. It's not like he was being booed out of the building, but people, they had a different favorite. They wanted Bret Hart to win. They wanted Bret Hart to win the Royal Rumble. They wanted Bret Hart to win the championship, and that's why they made the change. And Lex Luger never did win the WWF title, not even for a few minutes at WrestleMania that night. Yokozuna beat him again. And Bret Hart ended up being the champion, all because Vince McMahon felt he could drag this out. But the entire time, it was all, it didn't matter. Because the way this all played out with the stipulation, Luger looked like an idiot. Why would people cheer for someone like this? He looked like a fool.